Hey everyone, welcome to the 28th Pietro Belluschi lecture presented by Amale Andraos. I am Nicholas Demoncho, Department Head of Architecture, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural lecture of our fall 2023 lecture series. Before I say a few words about this evening's event, I'll begin with our land acknowledgement. MIT acknowledges Indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of the land and the enduring relationship that exists between them and their traditional territories. The land on which we sit tonight is the traditional and unceded territory of the Wampanoag Nation. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced occupation of their territory, and we honor and respect the many diverse Indigenous people connected to this land on which we gather from time immemorial. So thank you again for being here tonight. How this is going to go, you will get to see Amale soon. I'm going to quickly talk about this lecture and what it means, and then I'm going to introduce our Dean, Hashim Sarkis, to introduce Amale. And then you'll get to see Amale and her lecture, and then you'll get a discussion moderated between Amale and the chair of our Lecture and Exhibits Committee, Professor Yolanda Daniels. So, for those of you who don't have this information at your fingertips, Pietro Belluschi served as Dean of the MIT School of Architecture and Planning from 1951 to 1965. Born in Italy, he was educated at the University of Rome and Cornell. The career that Belluschi served is really interesting and instructive to us because he first served as a practitioner and a deeply proficient practitioner in the Pacific Northwest in Portland. But then when he was selected to succeed William Worcester as dean at MIT, Belluschi, in a convocation speech at Reed College in Oregon, anticipated his new work in the academy and its importance. In these dark times, which are different from our dark times, but relevant to them, in these dark times, he said, we have a greater need of faith in the future than ever. But the symptoms of current events, our civilization may commit suicide on a tremendous scale and in a shattering short. But I persist in the optimistic view that in all events, the foundations of a new renaissance-ness of time are being laid now. It will not be for us to see it, and we must reckon in generations for its flowering, but I believe a better environment for a happier mankind is in the making. It is the task to excite the imagination, and it is now in the hands of our young people. It is for this reason and in this hope that I've elected to forego a busy practice to take part in education. I look with great misgivings at my accomplishments of the past, full as they are of compromises, failings of their goals, yet I have never doubted that there were ideals to sustain, and these I hope to transmit to the younger generation. So I can't think of a better way to start our evening tonight than with such a reflection, and to start the lecture that really represents our department's attempts to live the ideals of Belluschi between education and practice, which has included over time lecturers such as Eduardo Catalano, Alvaro Siza, Cayuza Sejima, Tom Main, Peter Zumthor, Rafael Maneo, and Jeannie Gang, and tonight, of course, Amale Andraos. This annual event seeks to sustain the ideals and goals Belluschi espoused, and it is in particular merit of those that I also introduce Belluschi's successor, Hashim Sarkis, himself a distinguished practitioner and educator, to introduce the distinguished educator and practitioner lecturing to us tonight. So Hashim, welcome to the podium.
Good evening, happy equinox. Amal masal khair. Good to have you here. Nicholas, thank you very much for the honor and pleasure to introduce our guest, Amale Andraos, professor, former dean at Columbia Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation, and partner at WORKac, an international and internationally renowned practice based in New York City. At the end of her talk, Amale will be in discussion with our own Yolanda Daniels. Yolanda is a professor of architecture at MIT, partner in the design firm Studio Sumo, recipient of the Rome Prize, and author of several projects and installations that have been extensively published and exhibited in venues ranging from the Whitney to MoMA, all the way to the Venice Architecture Biennale. Yolanda, thank you very much for joining Amale on stage tonight. I have known our guest speaker, Amale Andraos, for more than 25 years now, as a student at the GSD, as a colleague, as a fellow Lebanese, as a very valued member of our visiting committee for architecture department, and until recently as fellow dean, but also as a constant friend of my wife Diala and mine. So I can speak at length about her amazing achievements with a deep knowledge, and I would add proudly, with the biases of a friend and admirer of all what Amale has brought to architecture and to architecture education. But this is all too well known for an architecture audience. Alternatively, I can give you a Lebanese introduction. You know Amale. Of course you do. She is the daughter of Farid. She is married to Dan. In Lebanon, you would say, he's American, but he's nice. You do know Amale, come on. She is the cousin of Asma. By the way, I saw Asma in Beirut last month, and she sends her regards. She thinks the world of you. That's a very Lebanese way of framing all of this, which I would say would be by far more entertaining, but decorum does dictate, Amale, that we spare them all the embarrassment as much as self-deprecating as it would be. So, however, allow me instead to focus on humor, on the humor that Amale Andraos and Dan Wood have discovered in their practice along the carefully crafted path that they have charted throughout their career between work and play. WORKac highlights work in their name, in the name of their practice. And they also make us realize that architecture as a form of work deserves to be highlighted in the world. The process of bringing ideation to materiality involves hard work. But for some reason, it is rarely recognized as a source of pride or pleasure in what we do. The pleasure taken in their work, however, does not correspond to the Weberian Protestant ethic, nor to the Disney version of whistle while you work, of the canary in the coal mine, as it were. For Amale and Dan, work is a way in which architecture is given equal placement among the professions, among other forms of labor. This is very important because architecture then seeks its own validation, it seeks its own clientele and labor on its own terms. It also relates to the world like other forms of art, as a form of play, as a serious and rigorous form of play, by setting out ways of encountering the world through its own rules and processes of interrogation. That makes it both be in the world but also exist parallel to it as an alternative world that they carefully construct. This is, after all, what the Romantic tradition at its best, from Friedrich Schiller all the way to Jacques Rancière, has highlighted as the precondition and consequence of autonomy, the necessity of play as a way for architecture to assert its independence, but also its connection to the world. WORKac, however, add another dimension to play, a very important one. In contrast to fatalistic and moralizing approaches to topics that we cannot but engage, especially today, like climate change, WORKac choose to address the problem straight on, but to lighten the burdens of our profession by complementing problem solving with imagination and complementing play with humor. What if the schoolyard, where teachers and parents worry about the safety of materials that children often chew on, becomes entirely edible? What if the apartment building, that ubiquitous and chaotic urban form of life in Beirut, becomes also Beirut's museum, its monument? What if the staircase of a fashion house becomes an oblique runway where everyone working there, not just the models, become models? I've never appreciated the way in which humor could empower architecture until I watched WORKac at work. But what is truly transformative about WORKac is that they also use architecture to give endurance to humor. Through their nuanced treatment, humor as a way of confronting the mundane with the unexpected, Humor is imbued with the longevity of architecture. A good joke is hard to find, but the hardest one is the one that makes you smile every time you hear it, every time you encounter it in this context, no matter how many times. A great building is, after all, a building that makes you smile. For all of the above, but above all, for her own thoughtful playfulness and enduring humor, please join me in welcoming back to MIT Amale Andraos.
Wow, thank you so much, Hashim. This was wonderful. It's really a great pleasure and honor to be here with you tonight. And so, how's the sound? Is it okay? Everybody can hear me? Okay, great. You know, that lecture was supposed to happen last spring, and it got canceled due to weather. And I had a dream beforehand that I was like being grilled by Anna Miliaki. He was like, "What is the theory behind your work? Where is it?" I don't know why Anna was grilling me, but I was like, "I'm just showing work. Like it's just." And so that is a little bit kind of where we are today as a practice. It's our 20th anniversary. We've been for 20 years in the Lower East Side in a kind of very studio-like environment. You know, the office is also like a school, and we sort of kind of are all in it together. And although, as Hashim said, our name is Work, and when we started, we were really committed not to get involved with academia. That didn't work so well. We always love to make books and to do research, and you know, starting with Above the Pavement, the Farm, which was a kind of examination of food and cities. The book wasn't selling, so Dan made a large-scale model of it and went to the farmers market. Or 49 Cities. This was the result of a research we did with students at Princeton, which traced 49 visionary cities through a kind of ecological lens. At the time, in 2003, when we started to teach at Princeton, our ecology and urbanism seminar, we had this sense that we had technology, but where were the ideas? I think we still feel like that at times. But my own research on issues of identity and representation and the question of the Arab city, and finally the book that we published about the practice, we'll get there when we cross that bridge, which really kind of is a very intense conversation about ideas. Anyway, I'm showing books because fundamentally I think it's a lot of these ideas, this teaching, this research, this kind of exploration across scales that got us kind of to focus. And in fact, the sort of last chapter of the book is really a sort of question mark about the building. And at a moment when architecture is everything and is so diffuse, and which, by the way, I was a big promoter as dean to question its boundaries. For us at this moment, we are enjoying the scale of the building, not as a kind of autonomous object or sort of bounded, but rather as a kind of porous frame through which to work through some of these issues. And so I'll take you through some of these projects today, and it will be self-evident the kind of threads of research that we've now tried to kind of work through the work, food, plants, people being connected, and creating a place where people can maybe be even optimistic, let's say, about the future. So the trajectory really alongside 49 Cities was, of course, Public Farm 1, quarter-acre installation, organic fruit and vegetable in a cardboard tube structure in the courtyard of PS1 MoMA. And whereas these installations often, well, not often, sometimes don't necessarily lead to, kind of a project that is exactly what you wanted to do. In this case, we were approached by Alice Waters and her sister foundation, Edible Schoolyard, New York City. Alice Waters is a chef and activist in Berkeley who has been really working on the question of food and healthy food and access to food for many decades now. And we were approached to kind of bring that project, the Edible Schoolyard, to NYC to work in sort of with public schools in underserved communities in New York, where access to healthy food, access to outdoor space, et cetera, was missing, and kind of invited to transform here a half-acre parking lot into, as Hashim said, an edible garden where kids can grow the food, learn about different types of plants and vegetables, and then, somehow it's all tied to their curriculum. This is an indoor classroom where every kid, this is in Gravesend in Brooklyn, is there at least 2 or 3 times a month. And, things that we learned in that project that was kind of interesting about now, not just plants, but also people. When you think about children, often you think, oh, it has to be safe and protected and small. And in this case, what was interesting about Alice's approach was, no, these kids go home, they need to be able to cook in an everyday kitchen. And so everything is really at the kind of a height that they would find at home. And these little details, I think, were very important to us, like not to make assumptions about who you're designing for, but to really kind of think through how they can be empowered through that design. And the building is, as Hashim said, quite playful. It's a little bit of a kind of pedagogical tool with these kind of systems wall where the kids can understand that, hey, the slope of the roof collects the water, here's the composting, here's the chicken coop. But tying it also a little bit to our obsession with architectural history, the pattern is the flower pattern of one of the best stores that was designed by Venturi Scott Brown, and we liked that moment in architectural history where architects were just doing a kind of showroom on the side of the highway, and it was sort of a kind of very everyday kind of structure. So the project in Gravesend, the idea was to do one in each borough. The second was in Harlem at PS7. In this case, it was a different exploration. It was how do you bring plants and grow plants on the kind of parking lot and on the roof? So we here explored planters, and the greenhouse is really a bridge between two parts of this really interesting modernist structure. And so that's the greenhouse, and again, kind of learning to grow food, cook it, etc. And it's interesting. These projects, they're small, but they have such impact on you, on the people that you design for. We're still very much involved with Edible Schoolyard NYC. There's a new director called Shannon Morris. And, part of the conversation was in terms of architecture, right? What is the value of a structure? And after 2 structures, they decided, okay, so the PS216, is the main kind of headquarters. And now they're launching from there, kind of smaller, creating a network in schools, et cetera. But what's also interesting about the life of projects is, where they lead. And so very recently, actually, during COVID, we were approached by ICAP, which is an organization, part of the public health group at Columbia, that were applying for a Columbia World Project grant. And they got the grant, and we partnered with them, and it's called Project Shine. And it's very similar to the Edible Schoolyard in terms of sort of ethos, but in this case, very much focused on public health, wanting to bring, to kind of support a public health effort in schools across Sierra Leone. And so the first school is right outside of Port Loco. It's called Our Lourdes Preschool. And this is the preschool. And we thought, it would be, at the beginning, they weren't sure how to involve us. We said, is there a history of kind of growing food? Can we do a garden? And slowly we discovered that, yes, there's a kind of movement now to bring back agriculture and greenhouses, etc. And so we're working now on that project and realizing that the kids eat lunch in their classroom. So we thought, why don't we have a ramada, and so the kind of things that we learned about the edible schoolyard, we were able to kind of partner with ICAP, and this is the team. The engineer of record is Raymond Brown, and Eamon Janga is the project manager. And anyway, it's going up. It's kind of very small, but it's really kind of exciting that these ideas are traveling. And this is the Ramada, and we send them 2 options in terms of color to kind of engage, and that's the color scheme that was picked by the kids. So, and it's really, it's very small, but again, it's kind of, it's a seed, let's say, that gives you sort of energy. We're very committed to public work, which when we first started in New York seemed like almost an impossible sort of idea. There isn't much public work, and we were coming from Europe, but there are still projects, and so this was one that we got with the DDC, the Department of Design and Construction. It's a Kew Gardens Hills Library in Queens, and it was really again a very interesting conversation. Librarians wanted to maintain the single story for access, and especially for disabled access, and felt like a two-story library was not that great. So we went and worked with the city to get an expansion of 15-foot of the sidewalk, and in a very residential neighborhood in Queens, incredibly diverse neighborhood in terms of number of languages and cultures, and but what's exciting for us is the kind of in between the buildings, there are always these strips of greenery and wild plants, and there was a strip of kind of greenery behind the building where, again, the kids who would go to the library would grow tomatoes, etc. And we said, why don't we kind of take that 15-foot but kind of wrap around the building this kind of strip of planted, partial building, partial planting, and created this green roof that is folded and becomes really part of the street and visible from the street. And around the entire perimeter are the reading rooms, so all of the different constituents, different ages at the library, each has a kind of little position and a view onto the street and light. And so here you see the green roof. These projects are quite tight in terms of the budget, and in this case we created a single mold of GFRC, and just by kind of shifting it and rotating it, we're able to create this kind of almost heavy-like texture on the facade that sort of lifts on either side. We visited it recently, and it still looks good. Laminate is not great, but other than that, it's still kind of holding and is a well-loved library. And this is the kids' corner with, this is the kind of, this is kid designed where only the kids can see out. So, and here's the library. Preservation has, when you work in New York, but also when you're trying to do work that is adapting, reusing, recycling, preservation has become really an important part of our practice. It's something that we really enjoy doing. In fact, we feel like some of the most creative projects now are in that space. And so this is we call it the stealth building. It's a beautiful cast iron building that's landmarked in Tribeca. It's one of we don't work often with developers. This was a developer project who wanted to transform that building into private residences and a big penthouse at the top. And being a landmark building, the penthouse needed to be really invisible from the street. And so we really worked with views and kind of traced the views and developed this kind of crenulated sort of penthouse, which, although is 2 stories above, is actually above the what was the existing top floor. It really is invisible from the street because it kind of traces almost the sort of the shadow of the bulkhead and the I was told to use and the kind of bulkhead elevator and the neighboring building. And so it becomes a kind of really present and articulated addition, but completely invisible and recessed to create this kind of outdoor space from that is kind of accessible and slightly elevated from the living spaces. And yeah, pleasure is important. And so we had to keep the elevator bulkhead. We turned it into a hot tub, and there's a kind of mechanism between the plants and the hot tub in terms of the watering. And, you know, it's a kind of a moment of respite in the density of New York, and really always working. That's the other part that we love about kind of adapting, reusing these buildings, is kind of bringing natural light as much as possible into the depth of the building. And sometimes when it's not possible to have natural light or to have access to kind of plants, and we try to find another way, whether it's a kind of pattern on the wall, or in this case, it's an artificial light and a greenhouse above the showers in the units below the penthouse. And so when you take a shower, the ferns, the steam of the shower allows the ferns to grow. So you have your like mini little garden greenhouse in your shower. The capitals were missing on the facade, and because we couldn't trace their origin, we had no documents. You know, Landmark did not feel it essential that we replace them, but we thought this was an opportunity to give back something to the street level, and so invited the artist Michael Hansmeyer, who may have some contact with MIT, I forgot, but who basically did a whole history of Corinthian columns in the neighborhood and sort of scripted this this basically contemporary Corinthian columns. Corinthian columns are about plants that grow. And so we developed these original 21st century Corinthian columns, which from afar look original, but actually are, you know, completely contemporary. And so again, collaborating and kind of finding moments where we can introduce a moment of surprise, and, you know, is something that we're really kind of interested in. So even if not all projects, you know, are, let's say, from the onset, have a public dimension, or let's say a sort of a civic maybe dimension. In this case, but we try to bring it. I think that's what we really try to do. We were invited to transform a facade of a parking garage in Miami, something that has, again, a long history in Miami. Dan likes to say, how does it go? He says, you know, basically, in Miami, people love their cars, they hate their parking garages, and so there's been a lot of kind of exploration in terms of cladding the parking garage, and it's been really interesting for architects to explore that. But in our case, we didn't want to be limited to just this kind of exploration of a sort of two-dimensional skinning. And so when we got our kind of portion of the parking garage, which kept kind of changing, we asked for the corner and asked for 4 feet of depth. And the idea is that in that depth, could we create a kind of vertical public space? And it became this sort of vertical ant farm, let's say, where we have a big exhibition space in the middle, we have library, we have a kind of DJ booth at the top, hyper-programmed, we have phone and charger, car chargers, etc. And then at some times you realize that's kind of skin deep, but at others it really feels like it's the kind of entire building, and there's this kind of interesting sort of thickness that is, you know, not just cladding the parking garage, but creating an inhabitable space. So here you see the kind of gardens. Well, these were architecture students, that, by the way, that posed for the shoot. A little lending library, a playground, maybe you're too young to recognize Miami pink, but we couldn't help but paint this all pink, being Miami, and during the day it really feels like a kind of building with this sort of vertical public space, and at night you really start to register the parking garage behind. And so this kind of trying to find a moment for people, for architecture, even in a sort of cladding, let's say, project, I think has been kind of really important for us. We are increasingly working in education, in the education space and with institutions, which is, for me, kind of really exciting. A few years ago, we completed the RISD Student Success Center, which also started as just a kind of adaptive reuse of this building, which you wouldn't think is a 1950s building, but it is, which was originally built, I think, for lawyer offices. It's the main building on campus. The president has their office there and a lot of administrative functions. And again, where do you enter as an architect? In this case, we entered quite early in the programming phase, and that was really exciting because we were able to kind of get a lot of input from students, from faculty, from the administration, and as we were kind of working through the program, there was a line item in the program that said mail room, and we said, what mail room? Who gets mail today? And realized that the students were getting boxes from Amazon and food from China, and it was just like really kind of chaotic, and so we thought this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity to have one point destination and to maybe reinvent the post office as a kind of civic moment for the campus, or find a way for different students to come from different parts and to interact. So in addition to the sort of renovation of the kind of U-shaped building, which became, a flexible space, gallery space, event space, with career services and resources, financial resources on either side, we decided to take over the parking. We love taking over parking lots, by the way. Decided to take over the parking lot in the back and created this addition. And in the process of, sort of working with RISD, very difficult to fundraise for a mail room or a mail building. So we said, why don't we create a flexible kind of auditorium, performance presentation space, and a new face for RISD. This was really the back of the campus, and in fact, it became a kind of new front for the campus. And so the kind of flexible space in the middle is kind of really open with this layering and almost a wall within a wall that creates these different rooms and registered the separation between the new and the old, negotiating the sort of topography between the street and the levels, and then working really with flexibility and the desire to kind of change things. We worked with these acoustic curtains, so you can have a kind of pop-up classroom when you want. It was the first gender-inclusive bathroom on campus. We worked with formerly GSAPP, a student group from Columbia, which became QSpace, to design the gender-inclusive bathroom. It's kind of really interesting ideas about the importance of the collective sink, but at the same time, the importance of the private mirror with a little shelf. These little kind of details were very interesting for us to learn. And so here you see on the other side the kind of mail building where the mail and the boxes arrive. Students pick it up, they get a kind of text, and then as they leave their cardboard, another student comes to take the cardboard to make art, or there's this kind of cycle that gets created. And the performance space doubles as exhibition or presentation space, and also becomes visible from the street and from the rest of the campus. The second library we just recently completed is in Dumbo, and in Brooklyn, and it's that building. In fact, what was interesting, in addition to it being a really fantastic sort of kind of industrial building, Dan, when he graduated from Columbia and there was no work for architects, started a model shop, and it was in that building. Anyway, Dumbo has changed quite a bit, and we tend to think of Dumbo as a sort of homogeneous neighborhood, but actually one of the reasons why the Brooklyn Public Library wanted to have its first library in 20 years in that sort of corner that you see here is that it really brings three very different neighborhoods, the Farragut houses on the one hand, Dumbo and the kind of more gentrifying Dumbo, and then Vinegar Hill on the other. So it's three very different neighborhoods. And so we did a lot of sort of communities engagement to understand, how the program could shift relative to, other kind of Brooklyn Public Library, a lot of engagement. And which kind of shaped the program, and then really working and exploring, researching, the history of the neighborhood, and wanting to find a way to, transform, obviously, the building. I mean, it's just, it was going to be the ground floor of, the rest being apartment units above, but we wanted to register the history and at the same time make a really big statement about this being very public. And so we worked with the Linked by Air graphic designers to do this kind of super graphic on the facade, building on the history of Dumbo's kind of super graphics. And you can see the sign all the way from the water, replaced all of the windows to become really soundproof because of the train. And then in terms of the interior of the space, the result of all of these community meetings was, one, working with the kids and the teenagers to make sure that the teenagers had a space, but also especially realizing that the kids zone is really where, everybody can come together and sort of mix. And so the kids zone became really the heart of the project. At the same time, people, when they're adults reading, don't want to sort of feel the kids always. So they're both at the center and also isolated and slightly elevated, because we wanted to make sure the kids would have views of the water. And the windows were kind of a little bit high for children. So we elevated this kind of centerpiece and gave the kids, and kind of perforated it to give the kids the best views. We've become expert on stroller parking, so the kind of this object for kids is carved for views, but also for strollers. And then the other carving is to, not carving, but to kind of work with the ceiling to have the ceiling really mark the different zones. So this is the teen zone. And another sort of, whereas the brick on the outside was already painted, and so we had no issue in a way repainting it. It was going to be very hard to expose it. Again, we wanted to preserve the patina on the inside of these kind of old Dumbo buildings, and worked with the building department to allow us to expose the timber, saying, timber you don't need to fire rate it. It's already quite, it can work, and they agreed. And so this was kind of a big win for us. So it's an original timber building. And so here you see the kind of shape and opening up to the kids zone, which is sort of very loud and colorful, and then you get these kind of layering and cutouts with the views. And the ramp is really the main access almost to the kids, and that's where they burn out steam. We worked also with these acoustic curtains for the different zones, and it's been kind of really interesting to see it used. Like many libraries, it became a vaccination center during COVID. There's a big community space. We wanted to kind of contrast the scale of the brick with a different also pattern and a kind of more minute scale of, so we worked on this kind of pattern for the object, and then again, the gender inclusive bathrooms. This is not a library per se, but two projects that are kind of one project that we designed. It's really a COVID COVID project we designed in collaboration with Ignacio Urquiza Architects in Mexico City. The Mexican government, the Mexico City government, is sort of launched in 2018, this idea of building 100 pilares, which are sort of community center-like structures for underserved neighborhoods. There's violence, crime, but there's also lack of access to education, etc. And to create these spaces for learning skills and for kind of safe spaces for people to come together, gather, etc. And many of these structures were originally just built purely by contractors, and in 2020 they realized that maybe they should engage architects. And Carlos Zedillo, who is an architect in Mexico City and has been kind of really pushing the government to re-engage with architects and designers. There's a big tradition in Mexico City of modernist architecture kind of serving the public in the 60s and 70s. Anyway, 26 of these pilares were going to be designed by architects. We were invited to design 2. Some of you may know Mexico City. So these are the 2 locations, the blue dot and the pink dot, not far from UNAM University, and sort of on the outskirts, let's say, of what, if you go to visit, you're usually not in these neighborhoods. And so it was very interesting for us to work with 2 sites because it became a dialogue between the 2. First, we really wanted to preserve the trees that were on the sites and wanted to work with sort of the views and the context and the scale. We did a lot of research with Nacho on the context, the types, seeing how existing pilares were being used and seeing what kinds of programs were being deployed in them. And we had these amazing conversations over COVID on, expression and, contemporary Mexican architects no longer use color because Barragan is too overwhelming. So we said, but we can use color. So it was a really fun conversation about being inside and outside and how that collaboration allowed certain freedoms for both sides, let's say. The program was given for both projects. It was COVID. It was all of it had been done earlier by the kind of social workers that kind of launched these programs in these pilares. But we also knew from having just basically done research on existing pilares that they're really flexible spaces. And the most important is access inside, outside to the street, and then being able to transform the spaces. This was our process, sketching back and forth. We had never met Ignacio over COVID. And, being obsessed with Mexican capacity to use color in concrete, we had this whole exploration. And so it became known for us internally as the blue building and the green building, both of them in dialogue, both of them kind of in corner conditions, trying to create a public space, public plaza, keeping the trees. And then on the inside, just a kind of very flexible, continuous sort of floor plate to be sort of used and transformed. And so this is the first one, and this is the second one. And you'll see that at the beginning, so it's really this kind of inside, outside. It's very, there's no air condition, so it was a lot about just kind of ventilation, air moving through. This $25 a square foot, so very kind of economical, and then just this continuous space. And at the beginning, not very used, but slowly, even just these desks and computers and, kind of programs coming in. And while there were originally programs decided, we could see that, it was surprising to see how they were taken over, political meetings, gatherings, a lot of exercising and, other sort of functions. So that flexibility in the end, I think, worked quite well to be sort of appropriated. How am I doing on time? How am I doing on time? It's okay? Time is okay? You have to tell me when it's, yeah. So this is another interesting, I think, adaptive reuse is the transformation of Intercorp, which is a headquarter bank building designed in the 80s by Hans Hollein, the architect Hans Hollein. So it's very interesting to transform somebody, in the 80s, so it has all of the, so Hans Hollein is, I don't know, maybe some of you know him, but not know him, know of him. But it's a really interesting figure. On the one hand, I will say, like all of the macho moves, the cantilever, the building that kind of opens up, but on the other hand, just this really interest in almost like interior decoration, in like objects in space and rooms within rooms and patterns, like just really, of course, he is famous for having said everything is architecture, and you see it in the work. But we were invited to transform what was otherwise a really pretty, pretty severe corporate lobby. And Interbank, this bank in particular in Peru, in Lima, is quite interesting. They launched schools and healthcare, and they're really trying to, for better or for worse, occupy a space that the government isn't occupying. And so they wanted this ground floor to be accessible to the public and to be able to be used. And so, using kind of Hollein's own sort of strategy, let's say we decided to kind of densify that lobby and create all of these different environments for work, for coming together, and also eroding the perimeter to create more openness and porosity between the inside and the outside, all with the idea of new kind of work environments, collaboration, coffee, So this became the main column that was in the lobby became the main coffee space. So we introduced that and wrapped it around, and it sort of negotiates 2 levels, and then introduced throughout these kind of moments, these rooms. We worked on the patterns on the floor. So it was kind of really interesting to be sort of working with his language, but also something completely different. So this is kind of series of interventions, kind of little seating area, meeting area, and this was before COVID, so it also became quite used and sort of really useful in the kind of Zoom times. And then finally, as sort of this eroding of the boundary, let's say, of that building with sort of wrapping different greenhouses to one main greenhouse, and these objects that kind of start to erode the perimeter on the ground floor, this greenhouse, this sort of odd bar-like shape, and then creating spaces outside too, which were very used for work during COVID. The only, I would say, project that really is a different scale and carries maybe the most some of the ideas that we had in 49 cities is Marea, 60 units on the water in Batroun in Lebanon, just 45 minutes north of Beirut. A few, I think, maybe interesting things for us with this project and with this particular client, Shafiq Saab, when he came to see us. He was really open to the idea of mixing unit sizes. He wanted it to be, kind of more differentiated in terms of income levels and not so homogeneous. He really embraced what we were pushing for, which was density, and not this kind of sprawl that has taken over the entire sort of coastline in Lebanon and elsewhere. And so density and a real mix of units, and trying to bring landscape and architecture together were sort of what enticed us to work with Shafiq on this project. And so the housing units are very thin. That's what makes it work. And so you really get a lot of natural ventilation, you get light, and then the roofs are all planted and create this kind of topography. And so part of the idea for us, so this is the wild context of what Lebanon's coastline has become, and so it's also a sort of little manifesto for planning and organizing and creating this little town, which in the back has almost like this kind of housing units with corridors. There's studio apartments at the top, and then two-story apartments below. But they're all, part of what we call a kind of housing unit. The studio apartments, in fact, while being the smallest, also have the most amazing view. They have the terrace at the top, and as you look down onto the sea, you have this kind of undulating topography of green roofs, and so the smallest units have the best view. Shafik was able to plant a kind of nursery and plant and test the plants for 3 years while the project was under construction, which really allowed us to make sure that the plants would survive. And so from every unit, every apartment, you have a kind of unobstructed view of the sea, and it's really this play between, in this case, landscape and architecture. I would say the only thing that we weren't really able to push in this project, in Lebanon, it would have been great to push more solar and kind of energy independence, but that will be maybe the next project. So one of the anchor piece here, and I'll go through a little bit quickly, but it's just, this is pure pleasure. This is Villa Papillon. This was the corner house, which we designed for the art collector, Tony Salame. And in this case, it picked up all of the ideas of Maria, but kind of wrapped them around a courtyard for the art sculpture, and he has an amazing collection of Memphis furniture, so we designed also some pieces, and this was really about living, crossing outdoors when you're going from one room to the next, and kind of having a lot of fun with the materials and kind of staging his kind of art collection. The third public library we are currently designing and that's under construction is the North Boulder Public Library. And here a few things that I wanted to highlight was how some of the ideas of the Kew Gardens Hill Library in terms of the single story and accessibility came into play. In this case, the building is almost like a kind of two-part building where one part is really sort of connected to the street and is a ramp that takes you up to the second floor directly where all of the community spaces are, English as a second language, etc. And then access of the first floor can be done from either here or on the other side where the reading rooms are. This is all a pretty interesting net zero project using kind of passive heating and cooling, and really working in terms of the shape with the context. The peak of the building really is where there are no residential buildings behind, and so it kind of minimizes the impact on their views. And otherwise, interesting aspects of the program. There's a maker kitchen, etc. And it's all solar powered and it's under construction. Okay, the last project, I wanted to maybe make sure I had a little time for it, is the Beirut Museum of Art, which we were hired to design in 2018 already, and it was the result of a competition that had taken place in 2016, and it was kind of revisited between 2018 and 2020. And I think COVID is such a moment of kind of shock. But also in the case of this project was a really good moment of rethinking the museum. Originally, when the competition was launched, it was really all about the contemporary art scene and the global scene, and after 2020, there was a real refocus, which is very rare for an architect to be part of, to rethink the institution as well as the building itself. And so today, the project is really about three things. One is the national collection, which no one has seen, which is really, an incredible work of labor that is being done by Taline Boladian and Juliana Khalaf and their team in terms of trying to reconstruct an archive of many of these paintings and sculptures are distributed in politicians' kind of houses all across the country. And so sort of reconstructing that memory has been, really exciting. Restoring and conservation. So the archive is becoming crucial to the project. The conservation aspect, there's not a lot of restoration sort of expertise in Lebanon, let alone in the region. So that's really kind of at the foundation. Education, BIMA really does a lot of outreach in public schools, and so that is really kind of central. And, exposing the national collection, which really tells, in a way, the history of the country through art or a nation information, conservation, education, and how to kind of express all of that in the architecture. And so for us, it was really capturing this moment in terms of the expression of the building, this moment of the beginning of modernism, let's say the beginning of the country's engagement with modernity, and this moment of the Art Deco building, where while the facades were really kind of ornate and it was the beginning of concrete, and the core was really simple. And so we were kind of inspired by that sort of type of building, a very residential building, to design this museum, to make it really open and accessible, and kind of not just physically accessible, but mentally, where people can project themselves in the museum as they would project themselves into kind of a home with a lot of openness, the light, etc. The site is a very kind of historically loaded site, right on the green line between East and West, where much of the Civil War kind of played out. And so this kind of idea of people coming together became central to the museum. And so this is the kind of project, which is what we call an open museum, where instead of a sort of very closed, solid building, as museums often need to be because of light and requirements, we instead enlisted the balcony and this Art Deco kind of expression to wrap the building entirely in these project rooms, exhibition rooms, sculpture, garden rooms that are all exposed to the outdoors. And so when you see the building, it doesn't read as a museum, it reads as either a residential building kind of filled with gardens, or when you go around, you can see these project rooms and art being kind of displayed right on the facade. And inside, some of that expression carries through with this kind of layering. And this is the cafe. It's on a campus site. It's on the campus of the Université Saint-Joseph. And as I mentioned, education, conservation is really central to the museum mission. And so it's became the entire second floor, and we were able to also take over the kind of back of house storage, loading, unloading, to create an elevated playground. The gallery spaces are really flexible, extremely simple, and then they're wrapped with these kind of outdoor. So here you see the kind of wink to this kind of modernist era, and then they're wrapped with these sort of outdoor room. The top floor can be transformed into an exhibition space, and then finally the top utmost floor is empty and just a kind of viewing platform. And this is it. Thank you very much.
So happy anniversary.
Thank you.
On 20 years, that's really great. And it's really exciting to see the later work and the scale of it. You know, it's growing and growing and growing. But seeing Maria and now the Beirut Museum of Art, where your ideas about engaging the public, you know, and the city, you found a way to infuse them in the architectural program and in the buildings. And I wondered if you might speak to that a little, because you know, programs can be very dry, but it seems that WORKac has an art of, you know, reading into the program and being able to introduce moments of play, introduce maybe like these creative collisions, and I wonder if you might speak to that.
Well, thank you. We are excited to be very slowly growing, but you know, I think that you know, as an educator, we often say, you know, don't just take the program for granted. You have to like kind of twist it and open it up. And I think for a long time there was this cliche: you take the program, you do 3 boxes, you twist the boxes, you know, and it was never about that. It was like, you know, is there a moment that you can enter where you can turn something on its head, or you can, and I think, and it is a good connector. People can understand use, right? They can imagine themselves, oh, it's a maker kitchen, and so I think it's still important to grab onto these programs, but then give them an architecture, you know, so that even if they're gone, you know, there's still the kind of intent. And so, you know, I do think, you know, for the Beirut Museum of Art, it was really, it was this kind of inside out, and we were thinking very much about the city and the fabric, and kind of wanting to speak more to that than to the art itself. But it was almost like unconsciously there was, you know, a lot of wanting the building to feel integrated. And you know, for Maria, it was also interesting to think about these streets in between, and you know, they're publicly accessible, and there's a restaurant at the bottom, and so I think that we are always trying to find the hook that can make even let's say a more private project to have a kind of quality of, if not civic, at least there's a kind of collective ambition, or there, you know, there's sort of a shared capacity. I think that's what we always try to do. Yeah,
I do think the civic nature comes through, like in different ways, like the street of Maria, or here where it just in the museum, it just, you know, by turning it inside out, the public you know, is really brought into the building without entering the building.
And that was literally like, if you know, if you don't want this, you want to be inviting. I think this, you know, we have to kind of open up architecture to make it inviting. You know, I think that's what we're always trying to do.
So I'm also really curious, just like thinking about working in the office, you mentioned a lot about like teaming, you know, working with partners, and like just communicating. Like it seems to me that when you're working in the office, you have to lay the ground for like, I don't know, like just the ideas that you want to follow. So part of what you have to do is bring others on board, you know, and I think different people have different ways of doing that, but I'm really interested in how WORKac does that. Like, does it start with research? Does it start with models? Does it start with conversation?
I think it starts all of these things. We definitely, I mean, research is a very broad word, but we definitely try to, not start with design, but start with history, start with, with kind of researching the context and ideas, conversations. We meet a lot, and we're fairly small, and I like that now. I think there was a time where we meet 3 times a week. Then entire office, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and everybody talks about the struggles of what they're. And I think that is a result of COVID, actually, because when COVID hit, we wanted to make sure we were still in touch. So we were meeting every morning and on Zoom, but still just kind of being connected. And so we carried that through. And I think that's really helpful because there's always conversations like, are we going to do this project? And then in terms of actual project, I think it's research, then it's words, it's ideas, it's sketches, it's models, it's testing. We are no longer doing 100 options. I think there is a clear intent, that's set at the beginning, but there's still quite a bit of testing. And
Yeah. Well, there seems to be not necessarily a vocabulary, but certain themes and interests that you develop in different ways, like the parking lot versus the museum. They're almost like inversions of each other. Radically different, but still in the same family. And then the use of poché. And I thought if you could talk about that, because it seems to have developed along with your work, this kind of, I think you mentioned in the RISD project about bargaining for 4 feet.
The Miami,
Miami project, bargaining, the parking lot for the 4 feet. And it seems like that kind of having that space in different ways in the projects, whether it's an interior or a facade, is very productive, for your interests.
Definitely, I think thickness. We still think there is room for thickness, even if it's as thin as and part of it was, part of it is working through ideas, but I think, what was interesting, and just to go back to 49 cities for a second, was we realized years later that the way we ended up organizing the book was on the left-hand side is performance and data. And on the right-hand side is the form of these cities. And the form performs also, and so I think for us it's still, there is still desire for architecture to do something, right? It's a thickness that you occupy, and even if you gave me the tightest 4 feet, I'm gonna, it's I know I'm gonna make it into something. And the envelope is not thin, and it's not just performance, and it's not, so we definitely I think we enjoy thickness. It's hard for us to do glass boxes. We tried to pitch a glass box recently to get a project. We didn't get it, which is good, because But
you do have glass boxes, the greenhouses.
Yes, the greenhouses are glass boxes.
The spaces for plants.
That's right. Exactly, that's true. Yes.
Well, I wonder if I should open it up to. We have 2 students who would like to ask questions. Brenda Hernandez can start. She's an MArch student.
Hello. This is a little tall, but thank you for talking with us today. I think that it was really exciting to see a lot of the work on the screen. And I'm curious, because there's a lot of common themes throughout the work, right? I'm curious about anything that's changed with time, the delta, especially as you move through the profession, educational spaces as a woman. So I'm just curious about, the change.
A lot of, some things are the same. I'll start with the same. I think even if, I feel like even if we despite the situation, despite the world, despite everything, despite my personal pessimism, the work still, like, we get excited. It makes us happy. We want people to be, I'm joking. It's not just humor. Like, there is like this desire for generosity is how I'm saying. So I think that has stayed. I think what has changed is maybe, I do think that we are more at ease with some of the language and and like we used to do, we sort of know faster when something isn't working, when something is working. We collaborate better, we really like it. And, I think that is a way today, we were talking about hating travel. And like, it's been, this idea that you can collaborate, like equal, like with Ignacio, we didn't, even though we know Mexico City, we didn't, so I think reinforcing that has been really important. And I do think that maybe what's changed really now is, do you want to do this project or not? And, and how do you maintain a practice that's sustainable, but, really only take on projects where you can find the thing that you can speak about, that it, contributing something. I think that's, and if it's not there, it's hard for us to take it. Yeah.
Hi, it was amazing. It was quite inspirational the way you presented, and from each problem you were deriving a solution which was iconic in itself. I'm from the computation group, so I have a question regarding the workflows, and adding on top of it, like how she asked, like how the workflows have evolved over the time, and also what is the best practice that you have done till now in terms of workflow and efficiency. Maybe that can be a highlight for me.
We are terrible. Terrible. It drives me crazy. The workflow is to stay small and communicate, because I think, I'm half joking. I think, okay. So we still make models, although it's more in 3D now, and we don't print as much as we do, even though Dan are like gesturing at the screen, and I think we're trying to have a workflow where the design of the workflow doesn't take over design, and I think that's, it's hard to do. We really struggle with that. We're still, we don't like BIM, but we have to do it. But we don't want to design in it. Like, it's really awkward for us. I think it's really awkward. And I know there's a lot of great things. I think we haven't yet been able to really integrate. And I think part of it is also scale. Part of it is if you are a firm at a larger scale, you have more people, you can design workflows, and but I like workflow. I just don't think we're very good at it. Yeah. Sorry.
No problem. I think we are open to questions if anybody else have any questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
The workflow question a little, because you design and construct buildings as well as books, and it seems like the one way to think about workflow is in terms of the architecture office and the building, but it seems like there might be a different attitude toward workflow.
And so the other workflow is a very constant, not just iteration, but it's more like we will critique and everybody can speak to, it's very like, we have a saying, we've agreed a long time never to disagree, in the sense that if we're not agreeing, that means it's just not good enough. It's not like your idea or my idea. It's like there's still something wrong. And so that is it's really a conversation. It's a lot of conversation between Dan and I, but it's a conversation with the client. It's a conversation with the project architect. And I think there's a level of control and a level of like, this has its own, a project, right? It has its own, you put it out there and it's got to survive somehow. So that's a very fluid but that works. That we can manage that. Like we know how to drive that sort of where it's open and also kind of really trying to get to where we're trying to get to. Yeah. It's just the BIM side is killing us.
And we can bring the microphone around for anyone. Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
It's recorded or something like that. Yeah. Oh, right. Broadcast. Okay, like this. Thanks so much. Wonderful work. And the work talks for itself, obviously. At some point, you mentioned architecture is everything. And also, you said, I'm going to show you buildings. And in a way, I see, in the buildings, there is everything. There's landscape, there's rethinking of program, there's color, there's icons, there's structure, there's all that you want to humor, all that you want to bring into that. And it makes it very compelling, because I think you do have, through the work, a kind of attitude, let's say, or a statement, all right? I'm curious, and it seems like in a very beautiful way you're immersed in the work of building. And over the past 2 or 3 decades of teaching and practicing, I'm curious if you see a change in the level of interest of students in building.
Yeah. The only question I have is I can never tell whether who's leading that conversation. Is it faculty or is it students? Is it, young architects? We are, I think, right now in a moment where buildings are not that interesting, I think. Maybe in the educational space for many reasons. I think, the issues are so large and, but it goes in flux, right? So I think, but if you give, I always remember at Columbia, people say, if you do a building, your students will come to your studio, right? There's also hunger. So there's this tension between wanting to use architecture to think about the world and explore it, which is really important. And I think architecture is an amazing lens to explore. And also the desire to, the kind of interest. But I think at school, sometimes it's hard to bring the two together, right? And you get this thing, and that's why we go as educators, there's always this moment like incredible ideas, and then, and so it's like, how do you make that connection? And I think that it takes a long time. I don't know, I mean, what do you feel like?
Well, it's an interesting question. Just thinking about Core 3, which is the integrated building design class. I'm coordinating that, and we're kind of having that very conversation there, where it's very building oriented.
Yeah.
And there is an interest in it, but there's just an interest in so much more.
There's so much more.
Yeah.
And I think it's, when I was on the Aga Khan jury last year, and Anne Lacaton was on the jury, and this is someone, I was fascinating. She really understands the wall section, and her manifesto about the world, whatever, like, it is in that section, and like she really will change, be like, well, what was changed in that section? Like it's just, and she's practicing in France. Here, sometimes it's very hard to change the wall section. I mean, in the US, you're like, but I think you have to try. Yeah. So yeah, you have to, it's a different, there's more product shopping here. So you have to like turn the product on its side, but yeah.
Hi, thank you for sharing your work. In your bio, it mentioned that you had some involvement with Columbia's climate initiatives, and I'd love to hear how your design practice responds to climate change.
The question was, how does your practice respond to climate change?
I think there's several ways. One is, it's kind of it's very present in the office and has been for a long time. I think from the moment of 49 cities, again, I refer to that book just because a lot of our attitude toward that question was in the book, and was we can meet performance, and many buildings meet performance, right? I mean, the library was LEED, and but where are the ideas, right? Can we also make things visible? Can we sort of mix, what is building, what is landscape? Can we thicken so that the architecture can still perform? So yes, you have to meet performance, but there's also architecture can embody other ideas, and for us this is also important, and we've tried to do that. So even if Maria is not solar powered, it is dense, and so it works against. It has private units and works against the private units at the same time. So you let the architecture do that, and then I would say the third point is maybe. To the question of what has changed, is what projects do you take? What kind of projects? Where? What is it going to require? Does it fit within what we believe is important to focus on today or not? And I think that's not so much architecture as a kind of position in the practice that we are quite conscious of.
Thank you.
Because it seems like, it's buildings, people, and plants have been a part of the WORKac projects for a very long time, in addition to the interest in public and cities. And it seems like, it's not a benign attitude, like there's something very intentional about the inclusion of plants in everything.
Yeah, definitely. The inclusion of plants and the care for plants and food, and I think it's this desire to integrate more, and that's a place where the messiness of life and the erosion of the building, I think that's where the erosion of the building happens, where it's like not so precious, not so wide, not so, it's like it has things that grow that you can't control, and that's a good thing, and that's, and yeah, that's been really important.
So, thank you for your presentation. My question was, your work symbolizes this desire to find opportunity for communities. And as someone who's done work in New York, in Mexico City, in Lebanon, the culture is different. And culture interprets community in different ways. So I really want to understand how you characterize your architecture to interpret these different cultures in different communities.
Yeah. I think it's very important specificity is very important. At the same time, I'm not someone who believes that you can't design for someone else. As architects, we are always designing for others, and you might not even know your neighborhood. You can't take for granted that you know the place you live in. So every project, I think, requires the same care and curiosity and specificity, and that happens through a process of engagement, of collaboration, of conversations that sets the premise of the project. Right? So these conversations happen, before the project, during the project. That's why collaboration is also really important. So these are ways, I believe, to not to fall in the trap of having that distance be a kind of fly in, fly out.
Hi, thank you so much for your wonderful talk. And I guess maybe you'll like this question because I'm just curious, out of all of the projects that you and your firm have worked on, which project do you feel most closely aligns with your values and that you feel really embodies kind of your, your vision for architecture? So pretty open question, but
asking an architect what their favorite project is like asking a parent who's your favorite child. Although sometimes you hate a project and then 10 years later you're like, oh no, actually, I think I wouldn't say it's a single project. I think we're working through a set of concerns and ideas, and each one, together maybe they represent a kind of set of inquiries and I wouldn't. Right? I mean, I think that's why I think. I don't know. We are at the moment where it feels more interesting to think through a kind of body of work than to. But and we try to bring the same level of. I mean, we treat every project the same. Whether it's small, big. I think it's really, We like all our projects. we feel very lucky.
Okay, well, thank you for the questions, and thank you, Amale.
Thank you.
So, I believe we're going to have closing comments by Nicholas? Yeah. No? Closing comments? Closing comments? Oh, I just gave them. Oh, okay. Well, thank you all for coming, and do come back for the next lecture on October 5th. It's the lecture in the BT series, and it's Marilyn Anderson. How are you? Thank you. Good night.